Hello, and welcome to Humans of Magic, the first new episode of 2025. I'm your host, James Hsu. In this episode, we're speaking to Sierkovitz. Sierkovitz is the host of the Magic Numbers podcast. He's a data analyst, and he's also one of the most brilliant minds of limited magic. Sierkovitz can also be found frequently collaborating with 17lands.com, which is one of the premier resources for data analysis when it comes to limited. Please enjoy my conversation with Sierkovitz. What's the biggest misconception you think people have about data when it comes to Magic?
I think that the biggest trap that people fall while looking at data is generally the sort of fetishization of a single number. You have a win rate of a card, and people look at this number and they say, oh, that's the win rate. That's the 57% win rate of that card, and that means that it's like above average to good. And that's enough for them, and that's where they stop. The problem with that is, of course, that every number that is a percentage is built out of a bigger sample. So 57% win rate of that card is built on 20,000 games, in which maybe in 5,000 of the decks that you analyze, the card was there for the right reason. And maybe in 5,000, that card should not have been there. And maybe in some amount of the games, that card has been drawn on the last turn when you were losing anyway, and it didn't change anything. And in some games, it was drawn when you were winning anyway, and it didn't change anything. So actually, on average, it will be meaningful, but you have to keep in mind that if you have a card that has a 57% win rate and a card that has a 54% win rate, it doesn't mean that in every single deck that you play, the 57% win rate card is going to be better. The extreme example is, of course, you have a black-white deck, you open a red card that has a 57, obviously that card doesn't go in there. The problem starts when it's a black card that shouldn't be in your particular black and white deck. And there, numbers are good as a sort of tool to give you the general impression of the power level of the cards, but you still need to have the fundamentals, the theory behind it, to know that if you have, a super aggressive white-black deck, and you have a removal in white that kills something that is attacking you, that card is probably going to be much weaker in your deck, because if you are an aggressive deck, who is going to be attacking you? You're the one doing the attacking. Putting in a card that only is good against creatures that attack you, if your plan goes correctly, 70% of the time that card is going to be useless because you're the one that's attacking. And when they start attacking, that's probably over for you because you're playing a super aggressive deck. And if the opponent starts attacking you back, that means probably you lost your momentum. They're going to take over the game because their deck is built to sustain a longer gameplay. And all those kind of things you need to take into account. And that's why looking at a single number like a win rate is not necessarily good. Same win rate of a color pair. But okay, color pairs can have, like, I can build blue-white in Foundations as a Flyers aggressive deck, as a tempo deck, as a control deck, and maybe some sort of a tribal. One number for the blue-white win rate is not going to tell me which one of those is a better one. You need to understand how to analyze those sub-builds. And it comes, with experience, with practice and limited, you get to that kind of level of granularity. But when you go to the Twitch chat and someone mentions 17 lands data, they will often say, well, this card has a higher win rate. And that's the end of the discussion. And then I get the stick for data being too simplistic for the sake of other people being too simplistic in their data interpretations. So that's my biggest problem with the data analysis that people do.
Let's use a real example, because I see people do this all the time. Maybe myself, once in a blue moon, is I already know what colors I'm drafting, or I think I know what colors I'm drafting. I'm now in, pick 6 or pick 10 or whatever pick it is, and I'm just using a reference list. And it's really close between two cards that are the same color. And I just look up the list and I say, this card has this win rate, this card has this win rate, this one is higher, so I'm going to pick this one. Is that just something I should completely avoid doing, based on what you've said?
I would say not completely avoid it. I do recommend it. So for the more beginner you are in drafting, the more you should stick to the reference list. The more advanced you get, the less you stick to the reference list and you add context to that list. Also, the earlier in draft you are, the more useful just the generic win rate pick order is. Like first maybe 5 picks, you're probably well advised just to pick the best card in the pack based on the win rate. And specifically games played win rate, if you look at the 17 lands data, which means the win rate of the card when it's in the deck. Because that way you not only position yourself for the good card, but also a good card that is in the best deck. And you want to end up with the best deck at the end of the draft. So pick something that depicts not only the card power, but also the decks that it contains power level. So that's what I would advise early in the draft. And the later you go, the more context is important. If you have 2 cards that are similar win rate, you said pick 10 or pick 8, in your color, first of all, if you have 2 cards in your color at that stage, that means that probably you've selected the right lane, because it's not likely that you're going to get 2 cards in your color at that stage. But then you need to start filling in the functionalities. You need to understand, first of all, what does your final deck look like? And without having the vision of what my deck wants to have, it's going to be hard to make that good decision. So if you're playing this, let's give this Azorius Flyers analogy. Azorius Flyers is a weird aggressive deck in the way that it's one of the few aggressive decks that can use this white removal that I talked about that kills attacking creatures. Because you attack on a different level than your opponent does. You attack in the sky and they attack on the ground. So for example, if you play the flying deck, you're going to be attacking, but you're going to get attacked back because they can't block your stuff, so they might as well be attacking you. Unless they have creatures with reach or other flyers. And most of the creatures are not creatures with reach or other flyers. So most likely, instead of just having their creatures sit idly, they will start attacking you, which means that you can have that removal that targets an attacker. So that card is pretty good in flying decks normally. If one of your 2 cards is this kind of removal, and especially a cheap one, you definitely want that card. If it's a flyer, then it's probably a higher priority for you, so you pick the flyer. If it's large ground creature, you don't have any plan to do that, anything with the large ground creature. You're going to attack in the sky. 1 large ground creature can be easily blocked. The power of the large ground creature decks is in their density. You put several of those, and they can cope with the first 2. The third one gets them. If you only put 1, they can cope with the first 2. It's the third one that gets them, so putting 1 doesn't make that much sense, does it? So knowing that already limits what you can put in those decks. If you're playing at instant speed, you might want to have a counter spell. But if you're not playing at instant speed, you probably don't want to have a counter spell, even though it has a high win rate. So yeah, all those small things will add up to your decision. And data is a nice servant that supports your decisions in some way and lets you do this sort of like a first kind of screening. If you have a card that has a 60% win rate and a card that has 52, good chance that 99% of the time the 60% win rate card is going to be a better one. Once you get closer the win rate becomes, the sort of more you have to rely on your understanding of limited, understanding of the principle of the game, deck building, particular format quirks. And that's what I'm trying to do with my content. I basically take the numbers, but instead of just like, showcase the numbers, okay, this card wins the most, this card doesn't win that much, I try to put it in the context of the broader appeal. I study a lot of theory of Magic. I do, I'm a scientist in my in my professional life, I'm a scientist. And I'm always operating on hypothesis-driven analyses. So I'm not going to just give you, here are the numbers, here are the cards, you do that. I try to put it in the wider context. Like a couple of weeks ago, I did an episode on, there's this adage, just draft good cards. And I basically analyzed that. I checked what happens if you only draft the best card in the pack. And I looked at the data. I checked what is the average rank of a card picked by the player from the draft in the first 8 picks. So if you only pick the best card in the pack for the 8 picks, I could calculate what happens then. What percentage of games do people win by doing that?
That's your hypothesis.
If the average rank of the card they pick is 2, and someone else drafts.
Is that actually a winning strategy compared to not doing that?
Yeah, it is. You have like a big difference between drafting the second best card in the pack versus drafting third, fourth best card in the pack on average. That's a difference of like 6 percentage points in win rate. And obviously that comes with a lot of caveats, and I don't have time to go into all of them. You can listen to my content for that. But testing those kind of things is the thing I really like the most. Now, of course, content creation has its own rights, and when the format is released, I have to give people the basic information. These are the colors that look the strongest in the first weeks. These are the cards that look strongest in the first weeks. But the deeper you go in the format, the more I add layers and layers of complexity. And by the end of it, I have like something that is pretty unique. And of course, the irony of content creation is that my biggest audience is for the first episode, because people want to have quick answers very quickly. And once you get to the deep analysis at the end of the format, no one is interested. But that's just how world operates, and I made my peace with that. But yeah, generally my goal in making content is to basically research magic and try to test the heuristics, test the hypothesis, link what people have wrote in theory in the olden days of 2015 or something, and try to see if data can confirm those theories and hypotheses, and can we actually quantify certain things like that.
Right. So we were talking a bit about this before the recording. I'm just wondering, I don't know if frustration or annoyance is too strong a word, or words. You clearly see that there is a tendency. I guess the constructed analogy would be like, everybody just wants a cyborg guy. People just want easy heuristics. They just want, and that has a value in its own, because maybe you need to get that level 1, level 2 before you can actually transcend the basics, right? So I understand there's value to that. We could be talking about limited, we could be talking about content, but just, does that frustrate you that when most of the world naturally, almost mathematically, or has to be Twitch chat, right? It has to be like win rate, bro. Like that's what it's about.
I mean,
does it frustrate how do you feel about that? Yeah.
It doesn't frustrate me at all. I mean,
because you see it, right? You see it for what it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I can clearly see that. There are the moments where I'm just like, it is annoying. It is like, I put a lot of effort into this, and why do the
somebody wrote War and Peace, and now somebody wants like the Cole's Notes version of that. Like, tell me the story in 30 seconds or something, right?
Exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. And for every sideboard guide, there is the Dominic Harvey's Amulet Titan guide, a document that I'm intimately acquainted with as I play Amulet in Modern. So I read it multiple times, and there is also need for that content. And it's the same with journalism. There is pulp journalism, there's tabloids, and there is, the New Yorker. And obviously, the New Yorker is having lower circulation than the tabloid. And, there was this famous The Economist slogan from the 1990s, I think. The Economist, not read by the millions. And it was their selling point. And that's how it's going to work. The problem with the content creation is that, the prestigious journalism will be supported by ads of luxurious products, because it will be read by people with capital. Prestigious content is going to earn you still the same £5 from Patreon. It's just that it will be 1% of the people contributing. So therefore, it's not a valid system for monetizing anything. I still think that there needs to be, like, a world without Dom Harvey writing his Amulet Titan guide would be a worse world for the Magic players. So someone needs to do it. It's just, you need to understand while doing that kind of content that you're doing it as a hobby and not as a way of earning your life. And if you accept the fact that this is a hobby, you're doing it because someone has to do it, and you're not going to hit 1 million subscribers, you're fine. But you need to accept that. And there is no point in there's just literally no point in fighting against human nature. Human nature is what it is, and you can't change the demographics. You cannot change the fact that only 2% of the people who play limited will be interested in such an in-depth analysis. It's not a fault of people. They just play draft because they want to play draft once in a while, and they don't want to spend hours and hours studying the ins and outs of the format. The ones who do, they will find you and they will become your followers most likely. And the only way that I can, expand my content is not through catching people that don't want to be part of my content, but by expanding the base. That's why it's important also to make something that will make people, limited is a tough format to play. And it's so hard to get into because early days of drafting is loss after loss. That's why I always try to make this super advanced content for people who really want to go in depth. And this is my prestigious stuff that I do. I know that it's not going to have an audience. And the part that pays the bills of my arena adventures is something that makes you limited, more accessible to you as a baseline player. And that will require less effort and will give you simple advice that you can focus on in order to, at least 4-3 your early drafts rather than going 0-3 every single time. And easy to access kind of content. And it's not only me that does it, but I think that content that will let people who just start drafting not to lose their first drafts completely is going to be more beneficial to my content following than anything else, because if I can only harvest the top 2% of the drafters that are there on the planet, well, the only solution for me is to make 100% a very large number. Then the 2% will be also a very large number. And that's the only way I can approach it. That's basically it.
Yeah, I mean, it's about incentives, right? It's about the 100% not losing their shirt and just giving up on draft. I guess maybe in marketing, they call that the top of the funnel. Like, you need to make that as large as possible. People, even entrants coming in. And your incentive is to make it interesting enough for the 2% that do have some interest in what you have to say, right? That's what it is.
But I think that, there is, and everyone will have that. It's the same thing as tilting. I don't tilt much when I play, but I'm not immune to that. And it's the same with this kind of jealousy for big content creators. I'm trying not to do that. I'm either appalled by what they're doing or impressed by what they're doing, depending on the large content creator. I'm not going to put any names. Don't even think about it.
But hold on. At the risk of stroking your ego, I would say that when I think about like the top voices in limited content, you're up there, because you're either you're just up there, at least for me. And I barely play limited, so
not even close. I mean, there's Lords of Limited, there is limited resources, there is protocols,
and you show up in LR, so you show up on the biggest show. And
I do show up. I'm like the weather forecaster in a big channel. That's more or less it. I'm happy where I am. But just thinking about it, limited is just a very small field. Right. A lot of people play it, surprisingly, but the content in limited is just not comparable to the content of constructed, and that's even a small field compared to Commander. Commander is where it's at. That's normal, and let's assume let's acknowledge it and move on with the life. But I mean, I'm doing fine for myself, judging by the fact that, a couple of years ago I started from zero and with no contacts and basically not being known professionally in Magic as a player, which is an achievement, and I'm very proud of my achievements in this field. I just am very realistic about what it is. And again, I don't want to be frustrated by that. I just need to accept it. There are the moments, even or with tilting or with that, when you do feel that little sting of like, why can't I have millions of views? And the answer is because of demographics and how they operate, and you being an idiot believing that it can change when the demographics are like they are. And you cannot expect miracles happening out of nowhere when you're doing content that is not designed to be universal. You're going to have small audiences.
Right.
And I think that, we talked before the recording that you had the same kind of struggles, and I think that I like your content as it is, and I'm one of the people that is interested. Not interested enough to sponsor you on the Patreon, but that's mainly because finances are not my expertise, so I couldn't afford it. But I always would support with the retweeting and liking, so that counts for something.
Right. Oh, I mean, I think it's good. I think you strike me as someone who, I think I could learn from that, is someone who is, I don't even know what's the best way to say it, like at peace with reality. I think that's how I would describe how you...
pragmatic.
Pragmatic, yes, pragmatic. I think that's an even better term. I I think you found your, or maybe you were always pragmatic, right? You never found your pragmatism. You always, or you just, have you always been this way when it comes to kind of many things in life, or?
I try to be. I like several things. I like realism in either expectations or assumptions or whatever. I mean, that comes with the training as a scientist partially. And I also like to have things that I do have practical implications. And these are the two sort of guiding principles of my life. Be realistic about what can be achieved with the given set of information, and also try to make it applicable. So that's two things I really made my life all about.
But you were pragmatic before you became a scientist or chose to pursue science as a profession.
But it gets worse. I mean,
it gets worse
if it's a bad thing. But yeah,
okay.
You get more pragmatic as you train, because it's as with everything. I was always very good in analytical thinking, but me from 25 years ago, I would probably mock right now how naive I was, because of how much you learn as you do things.
I think if you're not a little bit embarrassed by who you were 25 years ago, you're probably not trying hard enough. I might have said that on the podcast
I had long
at some
hair.
point. Oh, I mean that's. I mean, I don't. Not even physically. I mean, just
that has
everything.
Gone.
Right?
Look at me
Different
now.
Era.
Streamlined.
Yes.
I don't have to wear a swimming cap in the swimming pool.
Yeah. I wish I had my long hair and beard phase. I never had that. So, can you tell me, like, just of the people that follow you, your fans or patrons, or however you want to call them, people that are interested
name all four of them.
You can all four of them. Like, what that mythical 2%? Is there something that like unifies them? Like, is what makes somebody want to? I don't want to make it so personal, but it is kind of personal. Like, what makes that 2%? What makes them want to really lean into the kind of like models and hypotheses? Are they all scientists? Like, what is it about them that makes them follow you and are interested in what you do?
So, I'm pretty sure I have one of the most high-profile group of followers that you can physically imagine. Maybe barring people like you, because I don't know how many world champions I have following me on Twitter. It's just absolutely mind-boggling, the group of people. I have like half of the Pro Tour circuit is definitely following me, because I put advice that is actionable for them, because they will understand from between the lines of what I'm writing about how you can apply that to,
because they don't need the basics. They're not the common draft player, right? Okay.
So I've been shocked, because I was a decent player back in the day when I was actually going for the GPs and stuff like that, but I was never like a Pro Tour material. I'm just too loose in my gameplay. Even when I was like playing 50, 60 hours a week, I couldn't get to the level where I thought I could confidently break the day 2 on the Pro Tour like every single time.
Was that when you had the long hair, or was after?
No, I was already having short hair when I started Magic, I think. When I first played Magic, I still had long hair, and then after 2 years, I cut them short when I started playing tournaments. So yeah, unfortunately, no coverage of me in long hair exists. I managed to trace and burn every single copy, I think.
So it wasn't for lack of trying. You really tried to quote unquote make it as a Magic Pro in an era where that could be remotely possible.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking late 90s, early 2000s. So I did go like to at least 3 GPs a year for 3-4 years.
That's pretty serious. Pretty dedicated. Yeah.
No, I had really good results. I day 2 the first 5 of my GPs. I day 2 them. Which, when you try to day 2 a GP, you know that it's not the most trivial thing to do it 5 times in a row without any buys for the first couple of times. That was all right. I cashed, I think, 2 of them. Then I qualified for a PT. And I had decent results. It's just like, I know that it's not enough to be like this regular pro level, because I know exactly where I'm not good and what is not there for me and it will never be there, independently of how much I practice.
Tell me about that. What were you? Can you share? Like, what was that then? The so-called deficiencies.
I can play for a long time very well, and I will make like 3 bad mistakes in a row just because of a lapse of concentration. Because I don't know, I'm planning something 3 turns from now, and I'm just forgetting about what's going on right now. It's like when you play pool, it's sometimes you think about where to put the white so badly that you miss the pot, and that's exactly what I'm doing on a regular basis.
Have you watched PT coverage in the last 30 years? Like that happens to everybody.
I also lack the patience. What I see from the PT coverage, and don't get me wrong, if I practiced like 40, 50 hours a week right now, and I would dedicate my time to playing, I would become like a very, very good player. I would be probably qualifying for those PTs, at least to some extent. I just would never be at the level where, I see Arne Huschenbach making plays, and I know that I couldn't do that on my own. Unless I would be told by someone, and then in a very, very right situation, I could apply it. But he can make those things on the fly. And I know that. And also, we diverged from the main topic, which was, I was surprised because of my lack of credentials as a Pro Tour player, and I still managed to get the followers. And then I realized that, the advice I'm giving, it doesn't matter who I am. It matters if it's applicable or not. And I try to...
It's good information. It's expert level or advanced knowledge, right?
My pragmatism is helping here, because I will extract the core of what needs to be done and what could be used. And I also very often will dedicate like a large part of my posts to how it should not be used, what you should stop yourself from doing. And it becomes, interesting for people who are practicing for high-level events, because for them, well, if they 3-0 a draft at the Pro Tour, then they are basically almost guaranteed day 2. They need to go day 2 to qualify for the next one.
Okay. So those players are very incentivized to follow what you have to say, because it can help give them an edge, so to speak.
Yeah, and especially when I'm doing content that is specifically looking at the top players and specifically looking at what is difference in high-level pods versus what you see on Arena. Because, of course, the Arena draft metagame is very, very different from what you see on a Pro Tour. Because in Arena, you get a pod, no one knows what they're doing, you pick all the good cards, you end up with a deck that you shouldn't be allowed to have that kind of a deck in Limited, and yet it does happen.
Arena direct
Pro Tour,
screenshots are the
for
best.
Playables at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. What about outside of those pros? Like, who is following you?
Well, a bunch of limited content creators and limited grinders. It's not a big world.
Okay.
The people who are there on the top of the leaderboard in Arena and 17 lands. There are some people that are just that just want to get better in draft. I have the whole shebang of a content creator, so I have my Discord with people in there, and people from my Discord will always see me the ones following me. People who want to improve, people who want to learn how to even visualize data only, because okay, I don't like bragging, but I think my data analysis, data visualizations are relatively good in terms of how they communicate, how they are consistently styled, so people can understand quickly what's going on. If they follow me, they see the graph and they know more or less what's going on, because it's going to be a similar graph to a similar graph from the past and stuff like that. So there's the continuation kind of thing, and not haphazard mixture of different styles. And a lot of people that are following me are just like data nerds that also play Magic. So it's a healthy mixture. And obviously, I do memes on occasions, and that gets you a lot of following.
Sure.
I can spend 10 hours on an analysis, write down a 25 pieces thread on Twitter, at the great expense of my sanity, because writing threads on Twitter is just not easy to make them consistent. And then I post it, and then I get like 20 likes or something, and then people saw it, whatever. Or I can make a picture, like recently when there was the Giganta ban, there's this meme with the death knocking on the door, and then you can see down the hallway there are 3 other doors that are open, and there's blood flowing out of them. And I just made this, and I changed the open doors for the pictures of Lurus, Yorion, and Giganta, and the death is knocking on the door of Kahira as the next companion to get banned in the future. And that got probably, 2,000 likes easily. I made it in 20 minutes on my kitchen counter.
Right.
This is how you get traction in content creation world.
Well, 2 comments on that, right? One, asymmetric words, which is fine because the people that hopefully gravitate to you because of the memes, they'll hopefully get to the meaty content, or at least that's what we tell ourselves. And secondly,
they never do.
Companion has got to be like, I don't know, is it like an 11 out of 10 on the storm scale? It's got to be like the most broken, never should have done it mechanic that Wizards has ever made. Eventually they will just ban every single companion. That's basically, it's just a matter of time, right?
So here I don't agree. I do agree, but I don't agree. I do agree it should never have been a constructed mechanic. It's just not for constructed. It is, however, one of the most amazing limited mechanics of all times.
Okay, so heart in the right place, execution, no.
I think that every companion should have... Your deck has to be 59 cards or less. And then it's a fine mechanic, because then you can just play it in limited.
Sure, arms race. If everybody has it, okay, good. Yeah.
They should play with this mechanic for a limited only mechanic that you can only use in limited and you can't use in constructed.
Oh, that's what you mean. I thought you meant like, just have everybody play a companion.
No.
Sorry, I'm
limited
still in my constructed mindset.
Because early in the Ikoria, it was so much fun to draft Umori, for example. And you build those decks when you had like a turn 2 mana dork, turn 3 Umori, and then you started playing your stuff because you didn't have to pay the companion tax initially. I mean, some of you might not remember, but companion was even more busted when they actually planned it and executed it. In limited, I think that the mechanic is great because it encourages you to do something differently during the draft. It's a natural build around. Like, you have to draft Lurus. Okay, I need to make sure that none of my permanents are costing more than 2. It's a fun challenge when you do that during the draft. Umori, I can only have one type. I can only have creatures, basically. Fun way of drafting. It's not very easy to do. Drafting Obosh or Gairuda was fun. Before, of course, the tax was added. Umori, for example, completely dead with the tax because you don't want to spend turn 3 to return it to your hand, turn 4 to play it. You're so much behind in that game that the bonus that you get from Umori doesn't work anymore. But if you can cast it on curve, it's perfect. So I think that they should work. I think that generally they should do more mechanics that are limited specific, that do something to your draft orders, because they make the longevity of the limited formats longer. March of the Machines, when they reprinted the companions, great limited format. And I still think that the old companion rule should apply, because that makes them all playable. And yeah, I think that the more they do those kind of things, the more limited becomes interesting and replayable. So I think that limited specific mechanics are the future. Because when you think about it, there's so many, we draft something and there's always, oh yeah, but this card is for constructed. And this is, everyone agrees with that. Yeah,
this card is for commander and then this card is for constructed.
This card is for commander. I'm saying, yeah, we have to agree with that. There are some cards for commander, there are some cards for constructed. Where is the cards for limited? I know that commons are for limited, but they are not there really for limited. They're just there to pad the packs so that you have enough. And of course, since limited uses
so they
commons,
can sell at a certain price. If I'm being
but where
cynical
are
or
the
pragmatic.
mechanics that change how you draft? Talents in Bloomborough, they were a great example of that. Often you would have to, if you have a builder's talent deck and you draft around it, you need to think completely differently than in a normal deck. And this is great also for learning how to draft. When you were telling me about this choice of 2 cards at the same win rate, when you're drafting a builder's talent deck, your order of picks is completely different. So you have to think completely different. And by doing that, you learn sort of naturally that the pick order is flexible depending on what your deck wants to do. And builder rounds are the extreme example of that because they completely turn the pick order upside down. And different flavors of the same color combination are more subtle, but from builder rounds you can easily move towards learning that there will be different flavors of your Golgari deck depending on what you're trying to do and what your plan is. And in order to do that, you need to learn what your plan is. And then you can go to the ancient limited resources episodes that tell you to draft with a plan, and then you can discover that there is a wide field of theory in limited Magic, and that theory will help you become a better player. You just need to understand it exists, and you need to find the right episodes of the older podcasts. And once you understand that, then the numbers can be helpful. Before you understand the theory, the numbers can be a nice tool and will help somewhat, but it will never make you great, because you need to know the theory on top of the numbers in order to properly apply the numbers.
So you can help me out here. I mean, this is probably going to be very unlike some of the content you do, but I have been out of limited for a while. I've been playing legacy, modern, like constructed formats for some time. I'll tell you my real situation. I reinstalled Arena maybe 6 or 9 months ago. I still had some gems. It's funny when you reinstall Arena after not having used it in a long time. You get all these pop-ups because like for like a whole year of like the things that they were giving you, like they finally gave it to you, and it's like you click through all of that. Then I see like some events, like I guess it's like I don't remember the set now. I think it was like oh gosh, was it like when they re-released the set? I think it was what's that set with is it Clans of Tarkir? Anyways, it doesn't matter, but I'm just saying that I come back to limited after a long absence. I logged into Arena. I instantly lose a whole bunch of gems. I'm just spewing gems because I'm terrible, and I might have just not even read the spoilers for that set, which I decide instantly, okay, I'm gonna read through the what's in the set, so I'll do that, right? And maybe look at someone's tier list, which may or may not be a mistake, and then I get deflated, and then I just don't touch limited again. And now I'm at the point where I'm trying to, gosh, this is such a long question. I'm at the point where I'm trying to like find my joy in limited again, but I'm just working with this outdated concepts I listened to LR like 5 years ago. I don't even know if it's up to date anymore. Like, what would you recommend for someone like me who's just trying to get back into it? And maybe I have the occasional fun cube draft with friends and the occasional arena draft, which I lose and I instantly get discouraged, and like some of the players that you mentioned. How do I find my footing, I guess is the question.
All right. So after complaining a lot about treating the win rates as a single number, I will of course pivot 180 degrees to tell you, look at the win rate as a single digit as a single number.
Just as a starter kit, right? Okay, it's just with caveats.
This is the starter kit. You have to start somewhere. Yeah. You can't start with complex granular view on the win rate without looking at the win rate first. There is the order of that. I think that, okay, so I'm well known with my association with 17 Lands to the 17lands.com, excuse me, to use the full name. To the extent that people think I actually run it, which is absolutely not true. I'm definitely not competent enough to run 17 Lands. Other people do it. I collaborated them from the early days, and I became a sort of unofficial PR person plus the unofficial data analyst for the 17 Lands, and I work with them. I have my input, but luckily I don't have to code any of that, which is great for everyone, including me and them and the users, that I'm kept far away from that part of the things. But 17 Lands, literally, I think a couple of days ago, they had a new feature. Normally you went to 17 Lands and you look at the card win rates, and you have this like big table with lots of numbers. That is a bit scary for people, especially that are not working with data normally. I think you work with the IT anyway, so you wouldn't be too threatened by that. But what they have now is they have, you go there and you can choose the table view or sort of like a grade view when they calculate the win rate into tier lists. So it is a tier list of sorts, but it's a data-driven tier lists where A plus is like bombs and Fs are unplayable, but all based on the win rate of the card. And I would say you go there and you start playing around with the table. You can read the generic one very quickly, see what are the A's and B's, especially you can filter, so you can only select, I only want to look at commons and uncommons, see what are the most important commons and uncommons, because you're going to figure out bombs when you see them. You're going to know that a rare is a good one if it costs 4 mana and it's a 7/7 and it has trample and draws you free cards. You can figure that one out. Uncommons are a bit more tricky, so it's worth looking at which signpost uncommons are good and stuff like that. You can look through that tier list, and then as you draft, 17 Lands is not designed as a drafting aid in the way that while you're drafting, it's not really helpful that much because it's per design. The philosophy of people running it is that 17 Lands is a learning tool, where after the draft you can look through your replays, you can look at what decisions you made, and you can learn from that. But they don't want it to be, the sort of stabilizing wheels that put you through the draft, because that's dangerous that you don't learn anything when you do something like that. And I admire that philosophy. I know that people actively want to have those wheels, and 17 Lands actively refuses to give it to them because of their philosophy, which is something really admirable. But if you open 17 Lands on the side of your drafting, especially when you do like a quick draft and you have a lot of time to look through those numbers, you can help yourself with the tier list and look through which card should I pick from the pack. So if I was advising to the beginner, I would say first 8 picks of the draft, look at the game played win rate on 17 Lands and pick the best card in the pack, or second best card in the pack, depending on what colors are there from the first 8 picks. Then at pick 8, look at those, see which colors are more or less the most represented in those. See which colors you saw a bit late in that pack, and sort of start deciding which 2 colors will be yours. Last picks in the pack, if you see good cards on those win rates from certain colors, you probably can conclude that those colors are sort of open to some extent at least. Start deciding to be in those colors. And then, based on the first couple of picks from the pack 2, you can find and navigate your lane. But the important part is you want to put yourself in a lane that is successful. That's why you want to pick those games played win rate cards early, because games played shows you the strength of the card in the context of the strength of the deck. So you position yourself to be drafting cards that are in good decks, and then try to interpret the cards that you're seeing into what lane is open and start drafting that lane. And I think the biggest problem of the beginner drafters is that they end up with 4 or 5 really, really good cards in their draft deck, the bombs, the things that they first picked, and then a lot of chaff. And the problem that it brings is that you draw your bomb, you might win the game. You don't draw your bomb, you draw 7 very bad cards. And very bad cards are going to be overrun very quickly in the current limited environment. The strength of the limited deck is going to be primarily determined by what is your 18th, 19th most powerful card in the deck do. If it does nothing, you're dead. If it is still solid, you're probably good. Once your 19th card is good, then the top end, the top 3, 5, 4 bombs that you have in your deck will be the tiebreaker between a deck that goes 4-3 and a deck that goes 7-0. But current modern limited formats, you can trophy with decks that only have commons and uncommons quite easily. And, a bit format dependent. Some formats are more like bomb sympathetic, some completely don't need bombs. But focusing on what the lower half of your deck is and how good it is more important for the beginner players than focusing on what your bombs are. And people tend to focus on the bombs too much because they think that I can only win when I have bombs. Second piece of advice, and this is very generic, the worse limited player you are, the more you should avoid playing blue in your drafts. And
okay.
I kid you not. Because 17 Lands has those tiers.
You must have
users.
done some data study on this.
Oh yeah,
right?
I literally did. I looked at. So I normalized the win rates for each group of players. 17 Lands has the 3 tiers of players, like the low win rate, the high win rate, and the middle win rate. That you cluster it based on performance in multiple formats. So if a player had like average 60% win rate in the last 3 sets, they will be in the high group. If they had 48% win rate in the last 3 sets, they will be clustered in this lower win rate group. And I normalized them so that the average for both became 50, because I want to compare what happens in each group. And then I calculated the win rates for each color pair in the last 10 sets for each of those tiers of players. And one thing that was striking was that in 10 out of the 10 formats, the low win rate players had a higher proportional win rate with Boros decks. So aggro is really like disproportionately giving the benefit to the beginner players. And in all 10 of the 10 formats that I analyzed, Dimir was it had a disproportionately higher rate for the top players if you normalize them to the 50%. So and it makes sense because Boros decks are aggressive decks. Those cards they have a relatively like high floor, as you call it, limited. So they will be always decent, but they don't have a high ceiling. So they will be decent, but never amazing. And if you are a beginning player, you are going to benefit from that because the floor is high. You are playing closer to the floor level because you are a beginner player. You're not reaching the ceiling that the top player will do. And blue cards will often have a low floor. They will be terrible if played incorrectly, but a very high ceiling. So if you play it very well, you will achieve much more with those cards. So the more skill you get, the more blue cards will shine. And, like great example was Impulse in Dominaria United, where it was the card with the biggest win rate delta between the low win rate and high win rate players. You open 4 cards. If you don't know what you're doing, you'll very likely pick up the wrong one of those 4 cards. If you know what you're doing, you pick exactly the right one. And because of that, top players win more with Impulse because they more frequently make the right decision. They rarely make a bad decision with an Impulse. They know where to pick a land. They know where to pick a removal spell. They know where to pick a creature. And because of that, they just win more with the card. So generally, as I found that normally low win rate players have a sort of like their normalized win rate is a bit higher than for most of the archetypes than for top players. Top players with all the blue decks did disproportionately better because blue cards offer that choice and have this low floor and high ceiling in their nature almost. It's like cards put something on top of the library. When do I fire that kind of removal? It's a very tricky card to play with. Top players nail it, and that's a very strong card in their win rates. Beginner players, they don't know what to do with those type of cards, and they have a very low win rate for them.
Right. So maybe another way to reformulate this piece of advice would be just kind of understanding your limitations as a player at whatever stage you're at. Although that's probably a harder pill to swallow than just saying don't play blue. I mean, because I think this is kind of like the whole like teach someone to fish versus giving them the fish thing. Because like I think there's value to say don't play blue because people may not be so self-aware and you'll get the same result. And maybe if you told them that like you're not very good as a player yet, so don't play blue, maybe that will just create a different kind of cascade effect in how a player handles that advice. I don't know. I maybe I'm just rambling.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was very simplistic. I never tell people not to do something. I do tell them that what is the consequence of doing it. When I coach beginner players, I tell them not to not play blue, but to be cautious of playing blue and to understand that by doing so, very likely they are
or maybe the non-blue strategies have higher floor or something to that effect.
But then, on the other hand, the first advice that I gave you, picking the cards with the highest games played win rate, it's going to naturally move you out of blue because that's how the win rates work. They will have
that's the
they will
beauty
have
of it.
slightly higher win rate for those Naya kind of color combinations because aggressive decks win slightly more in the beginner bracket on Arena, and that's impacted by the data. If I would filter it by only top players, you would have a different thing. But I never tell I would never tell my beginner student to look at the top players' data because I think that they should look at the data of people who are in their bracket and the bracket one above. So if they are in the bottom bracket, I tell them to look at the win rate of people in the bottom bracket and the win rate of people in the medium bracket. One is to know what's working for people at their skill level so that they can interpret it on their own. I mean, obviously there will be individual differences between people, but it's good to know what people with your skill level roughly do and what works for them. And one aspirational to look at the middle bracket because that's where they want to get. They don't want to get to the top bracket yet. They need to go to the middle bracket.
Right.
So I tell them, look what the people in middle bracket do differently. Look at the cards that they win more with than you do. and think, why does it happen? Why do they win more with this particular card? What do they do differently than you? Find
Right.
examples of content creators playing with those cards. How do they fire them differently than you do? And I do expect a lot from my students, and part of that is
They
you
have to
need
put in the work.
because I cannot tell you, oh, now I told you 3 things you're going to draft better. You need to be willing to put some work in, and you need to be willing to expand your thinking. You need to start understanding opponent as a plan. You need to start learning that patience is a virtue. You need to start learning that you need to fill in certain functions in your deck. And then sometimes you see, oh, this deck has good cards, but it's a bad deck because it lacks 2-drops, because it lacks early removal, because it doesn't fulfill the plan that this deck wants to be doing in this particular format. Because red is a fast color in this, and you want to try to make a long, controlling red deck, and there's just not enough support for that. Then once you get through that levels, you can actually learn, oh, maybe sometimes there is support for the red control deck, but in order to assess that properly, you need to get the information from the previous level. So I do believe, and I often make my content, I try to make one episode every format as a sort of learning episode where I look at the win rates of the lower tier players, top tier players. I look at the cards that they differentially win with, and I try to ask questions. Why does it happen? Why these particular cards are doing better in the hands of a competent player than of an amateur or a beginner? What is the difference in play patterns? What can we conclude from that data, and how can you use it to actually start thinking about self-improvement? Because I think that what you said is right. Awareness of your own shortcomings is very important in learning, because you can't learn anything if you think that you're good. And I always ask my students, how do they assess their gameplay? And usually, if they say, no, my gameplay is great, I'm skeptical, because I know my gameplay. My gameplay is not great. I know that, top pro players will complain about their gameplay, because in every game, there's so many decisions, you always make something wrong. If someone tells me that their gameplay is fine, they fundamentally don't understand something about Magic, and that one fundamental truth is, no, it's never fine, the gameplay. Gameplay always needs improvement. You can be fine in card evaluation. I can give you that. You can't be fine with gameplay.
This is something that I wanted to ask you about too, because I think I would say this is a double-edged sword. One of my strengths, but I think it's also a weakness, is that I think I'm fairly good at learning from others, but sometimes I end up just shortcutting too much to trying to do what they do without actually being there yet. So a good example of this is like, if you watch, folks like yourself or very good limited players, it's almost like once they've drafted and built the deck, that's it. But there's actually so much to actually playing the games of limited too. It's almost like if you ask a pro, they don't even want to play the decks. It's almost like they rather just like get to the level where they've drafted and built the deck, and then they're like, yeah, this is a 3-0 deck or whatever, and then or they say things like, of course I 3-0 this deck, just look at this deck list that I made. So it's almost like an AI could just play the deck for them. It's almost like an afterthought. They just go start drafting the next draft. But there's actually so much to playing it, because through watching streams, I remember I used to watch like Ben Stark streams where he would just like talk through like actually playing the games, and it's so, I mean, it's Magic, right? It's so complicated. So how much do you think someone should, to make this a question, like obviously you got to get really good at drafting and building the deck or the 40 cards, but like how much do you need to also work on playing the games? And is there a kind of like trap where people think they're like they're good at one, but they're actually bad at the other, and that holds them back? Or maybe they're really bad at drafting, but they're actually good at playing the deck, so it can mitigate. Like I'm wondering, like what kind of patterns or trends do you see, and when it comes to like building versus playing the deck in limited?
So yeah, I think that building and drafting is the quickest fix. If you're like beginning to draft at all, I think that focusing on drafting and building the deck is going to get you a large chunk of the way. that will
It's
get
like
you
deck
like,
selection and constructed, right? If you
Yeah,
have the right deck, yeah.
I mean, if you have like some kind of gameplay skills, you played some constructed, and you can draft consistently decent decks and build them well, you're probably going to be very easily in the 55% win rate kind of bracket. Pushing that 55 to 60 and pushing that 60 to 65, that requires, you can probably push to 60 in a couple of years, and then probably in a decade or so, you can push that 60 to 63. The incremental improvement is going to be absolutely painful to get you to do, but with 65%, we're talking Sam Black, we're talking Kyle Rose. That's the kind of players that will get 65% in Arena Best of One in terms of win rate. And this is normal with everything. You get, with your running times. I do know that you're an avid runner. See, you don't have to do that talk with me because I know. But I'm pretty sure that, getting your time in a marathon to 4 hours is doable for any human, really, at a certain age.
Yes. There's a joke. Anyone with legs can run a 3-hour marathon. That's the joke. Yeah.
Yeah, and then going to 2.5 is a problem. Mm-hmm. And every minute that you trim off the 3 hours is going to be a big achievement and practice. And there will be a limit that you're going to reach at a certain stage. And I'm pretty sure that anyone with hands that can shuffle, and I don't know, what do you need for Magic? You don't need anything. Anyone with a brain.
Maybe not even hands. You just be able to use the mouse.
Anyone with a brain that is moderately functional can get themselves to 58% win rate in Limited on Arena.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very good win rate. But going above 60%, not everyone, I think, is capable of doing that. And it would require some coaching in some cases, whatever. But if you are frustrated with Arena, I think my favorite cheat, I don't do that because I have one account on Arena and that's it. But I do know a lot of people that have multiple accounts on Arena. When they do their daily quests every now and then, accumulate gold through that, and they only play bronze to gold. Bronze to gold, and then they move to a different account, they go bronze to gold again. And of course your win rate is much higher if you go bronze to gold, because you play against people who are in bronze/gold. And it removes a bit of frustration, it's cheaper, you can basically be free to play if you do the quests once in a while. And because Arena is free to play, it just depends on how often you want to play it. If I wanted to play 7 drafts a day, I would pay. But because I only want to play 1 draft a day, I will have to recharge like every year or every half a year or so.
Yeah.
And then of course then there's Arena Open that always gets me, and then I lose all my gems and I have to rebuy it.
I'm laughing because I just realized like it's so fascinating that I've never considered this before, and it's not because as someone who used to play poker a little bit, like I feel like it's so counterintuitive to how I thought about poker, which is like you always want to find the fish, or you always want to find the easy table where you can just make more money because that's what it's about. Whereas in Magic, I feel like there's a kind of like, for me anyways, there's this sort of like a code that's holding me back. It's like if I have to like keep hitting my head against the wall at a certain rank, like I'm just going to keep doing that and just accept that I suck and beat myself up, and I just need to like I won't go down a level. Like I'll just keep trying to flounder at that level, Whoever was not stuck in Diamond 4 purgatory may cast the first stone. But I've been I've had seasons in Arena when I spent like good 10 drafts in Diamond 4 without budging, just like there's a kind of pride that you need to like
4,
overcome.
3, 1, 3.
Yeah. It's just like I can't accept, that I'm not good enough. I'm just going to keep trying. So
I think accepting your level is
not
important.
In your case. Maybe it's just variance, but I'm saying like certainly in my case, it's like I'm just not that good, but there's a kind of like delusional force field that we create around ourselves as Magic players, which doesn't even come from other parts of life, which is kind of funny if you think about it. So
I think that we don't have to talk about it, but there is Magic is ripe with one major. I don't think of the 7 deadly sins. I have my own list, and one of them is definitely entitlement. when we
Oh
think
yeah,
that we deserve winning more because of the effort spent.
because we
and stuff
played
like that.
more or we worked
Yeah,
on it, right?
or because
Yeah.
we have
Can we
history
keep
or
that in?
something.
Because I feel like I struggle with that all the time, just entitlement. Yeah, we don't have to go deeper than that, but
No. I just wanted to mention that because it's a good thing to try to purge once you start learning, because entitlement stops people from learning a lot because
right.
it brings this kind of idea that, well, I know that better, and therefore I'm
Yeah.
just going to learn to do it differently because I'm entitled, so I don't have to learn.
And then you're on tilt because you lose to someone who doesn't know all the things. And
Exactly.
I know it, therefore I deserve to win, or I deserve to not lose in this case, right? Or, I
and
don't know.
especially when you notice a pattern in the losing, maybe it's just not luck. Maybe there is something in that pattern, and I would encourage people to try to find patterns in their losing. I do spend a lot of time coaching. I spend a lot of time looking at the lost games, and we definitely find things like not being able to turn the corner in the right moment, or turning the corner too quickly in some cases. Everyone will have a slightly different trend, but there are definitely trends when you start looking at the games that you lost and thinking about where were they lost. Like the replay thing on 17 lands is just amazing because you can go play by play every match that you played in limited in the history of your participation in Arena, and you can see exactly where the mistakes were. This is like, I do coaching, but I don't think that you need to do coaching to get better. But sending your friend a link with your game and having a fresh pair of eyes looking through what happened there, that's such a good way of learning to be better. You may not trust your friend every single time, and maybe they are wrong in some cases, but very often they will find something that you missed because they have a differently working brain. We all know that. Why do companies run teams? Because the diversity of brains will come with a different solution because of just different approaches that you chuck at the problem. And one of them will be superior, and the key of being a team member is knowing that it's not always yours that is the superior one. 90% of the time it is, but 10%, other people are right.
Yeah. That's honestly one of the few good uses of Twitter or Discord in my mind, is just like when people help each other with like, this is what I would have considered doing differently. And especially when you tag like maybe a Sierkovitz or LSV, who sometimes they'll actually respond, and there's something interesting that comes out of that conversation. So
no, with Lewis, you just need to tickle his pride. And it works every time.
You gotta light the fire. Yeah. Everyone has a different thing. So I've asked you a lot of advice about how to. Obviously, I try to put it from my perspective, but hopefully, like someone listening to it could also, someone who's similar to me but not me could hopefully benefit from that. I want to ask you like a slightly different question, which is like, knowing that people follow this advice, and if they just follow certain heuristics or principles, they will become a more winning limited player. Where do you think the pitfalls are? Like, what prevents someone like me from like, okay, I heard your 3 or 4 pieces of advice and I'm trying to apply it, but I still hit a ceiling, or I still get into a rut or a trap. Like are there any trends of people that you've seen that like they just can't seem to transcend like a 40% win rate or something like that? Like, what's holding them back?
I think that lots of things that hold people back are pet peeves. I know that some people that, they like playing red too much, and that costs them because they draft red preferentially.
So the Johnny side is holding them back, kind of.
Yeah, it's some people play too much aggro, and they suffer in formats where aggro is not so good because they will still try to force aggro, and they want to play aggro, and that's it.
Or they just want to play blue, right? Something like that.
What holds my win rate back? I like to build weird build-arounds. And I put it in costs because that part of building around is learning the format into a different level of depth. But I do know that sometimes I pick a suboptimal pick just because I want to feel something.
You want to see how it goes. You're curious, right? It's almost like an experiment.
To a fault. If I wanted to really like focus on delivering wins, I know roughly how to do it, and I probably get like trim another percentage win rate out of that. My problem is lack of patience, for example, in the game, and I think that lots of people suffer from the same thing as I do when they will fire that removal 5 turns too early unnecessarily because they want to okay, it's turn 3. I have 2 potential attackers. They have 1 blocker that stops me. I kill the blocker, attack, and then if they play an even harder to deal with blocker, that's the problem of me in the future, and I don't care about it.
So it's almost like there are gameplay fundamentals that hold like lower level players back. Okay.
Yeah, and I think lack of patience is one of those things, but also insecurity. Especially in complex board states. And I know it from paper. If I play with an experienced player and I build up a board state that is complicated, I'm like 90% to win that game because I know how to navigate through that. I know exactly where the line is. And unless there is some kind of a backbreaking bomb that will obliterate this board state, I'm going to weasel my way out in this game. And I see their line. I know that they could have won that game, even without knowing what they had in their hand. But the large board state is stopping them from making a decision because, one bad attack in a complicated board state can be disastrous. And it comes with practice, of course, this kind of navigating those kind of board states. It will come with practice, but also I think it's a certain level of complexity that you can comprehend that will be better with practice, but maybe some people are not very good in like overcrowded board states. So this is something that is worth working. And this is something that particularly constructed players are suffering because if there is a complicated board state in constructed, it means that someone is spinning the wheels and the game. In 5 minutes, when this turn will be over, the game will be also over. But you don't get complicated board states like 2 sets of creatures staring in each other's faces in constructed games because constructed decks are designed not to have that. Because there's either sweepers on one side or...
There's not a lot of that going on, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Combat maths is specifically something that limited players are really good at. And because they experience it much more. So constructed players often struggle with that kind of thing. And to me, the answer to it is build decks that don't care about the board styles. Leave it to some blacks to make board styles. Oh yeah, that's a great example of a player who has a lower win rate than they could have had. Sam Black will always try to make his deck into a lantern control. His decks...
The mad scientist, yes.
Always need to be no win con, but inevitability. Very much the principle of lantern control in Modern.
Yes.
And of course, he could win much more by playing decks that are assertive, aggressive, and play good cards. He's capable of that.
So this is like the line, like true power is when you have the power, but you choose not to wield it or use it.
Yeah, and he's doing it, and for the benefit of the game, because his theory crafting is absolutely incredible. Like, this is another thing that I would encourage everyone. I mean, it's not my content, and I'm doing advertisement for someone else's content, but limited community is pretty tightly knit, so I don't really mind that. Sam's Black podcast, Drafting Archetypes, is great, not only because people listen to it to learn how to learn blue-black in Foundations or something, but what people should listen to is how to think about the limited format. How he goes from, okay, this set has 3 cheap instant speed removal spells. That means control is on the menu. And how he goes from that observation to building a fully functional deck in that color pair while utilizing the underdrafted cards. This is how people should listen to this content. How to craft in your head what is the plan of the deck and what pointers are important to notice in what is possible and what is not possible. And he's really, really good in explaining them in a very simple way while the complex ideas are running there in the back. So that's what I would recommend this one to listen to if you want to get better into this next level. Not only which card to pick, but how to make those cards into a functional deck that has a coherent plan and that is prepared to counteract with other plans. Because this is the evolution of the limited player. Draft good cards, don't draft bad cards, have a deck, have a plan, understand that the opponent is having also a plan and that your plan should take that into account. And once you get there, you're somewhere at the 60% win rate. Once you really get there. Not just...
Right.
Listening to me saying that sentence will not get you there, but
exactly.
Fully understanding all those concepts will get you there.
And that's the fun of Magic is when you observe higher level players such as yourself and Sam Black talk about it, it feels almost like Zen or philosophical, and then one day you get there, you reach nirvana, and you realize, yeah, that's actually the way, but you couldn't have done it unless you actually walk through that yourself. And in the beginning, you're just like, what is this mumbo jumbo that they're talking about,
But
right?
this is the one thing I never understood with magic education in general, and I do that. Exact shtick in my podcast, and I will redo it here because I think it's a good one. My daughter's learning to play piano. She started like 3 years ago, and in the beginning it was just playing dum 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 dum, and she did it for hours and hours and hours.
Right. This is
Then
the wax on, wax
playing,
off.
like,
yeah.
Then she started playing like simple one-hand melodies. Then she started adding the second hand and playing chords. Now she's literally reading music and playing songs and perfecting them. And I think in 3 years, if she continues, she will be able to play like a simple sonata from Chopin. In Magic, when you start playing, you are expected that, okay, I know like a note, and I know that you push the keys with your fingers. Let me play the sonata from Chopin. Where is the order of education? Of course, the order of education has to go from that. There are programs for education in every single thing possible. Why in Magic do we have to teach people complex ideas together with simple ideas and not have some kind of a cohesive plan of structuring this education that they get the basics and then they move to more complex things as they progress? And we don't.
This is the thing that I know this is kind of a leading question or comment, but I feel like this is the thing that the top minds, at least in limited, should just do. Like the same way that Reed Duke, I think he made a course for Magic where I remember reading through that on the Wizards site and later as a PDF where he talks about here's the fundamentals and then here's how you get better and better and build on top of that. I feel like there needs to be, that was sort of my question in the first place, was like, I feel like there needs to be a curriculum to actually like, look, just do these 2, 3, 4 courses, like do exactly these things to learn the initial thing on the piano, and then you learn Chopin later. And like there should be a whole curriculum for that. Like I just feel like someone should just build that. Like there should be just like a school for limited. Like I know you could listen to your podcast or LR or Sam's podcast, but someone needs to just write the definitive book or course on here's how you get better, like starting from zero as a limited player. Like that's going to like 10x or more like the people that enter limited. If that becomes like the Bible, in the same way that, you know, running or like many things that people do as an amateur, like there's Bibles for these things. Like how do you get into it? Like Magic's never had that in 30 years for limited. You always had to like go find and scrounge around for like, listen to this episode of this podcast, like learn this thing. Like it's all scattered. Like, shouldn't it be up to someone way more knowledgeable than me to like just make that thing?
Yeah, the problem with that becomes like, it's also evolving continuously. I think that there is if you Google on Reddit the essential limited resources episode,
I mean, that never stopped institutions from teaching
no, that's true.
every subject in the world, right? I guess, yeah.
They have a bigger budget, I think, than the content creator in Magic. But I think that there is somewhere, if you Google like essential limited resources episodes, there is a thread in Reddit that lists the ones that are having the essential concepts. And these are not format specific. This is how I started. Like when I came back to Magic in Dominaria after not playing for over a decade. I just like got invited to Arena beta test, and then I got Arena. I started playing Arena, and 3 days later I was at the pre-release, because you cannot keep a person like me away from Magic for too long. For 11 years, I didn't even spare a thought on Magic the Gathering. I just stopped playing when I moved countries.
Yeah.
Because I lost my network, I didn't take my cards with me. I basically wound down completely. I stopped
like
playing
when
from
I first
Monday
went to China,
another.
it was the same thing. Yeah, it just got disconnected from my life. It sounds like, yeah.
And then nothing happened, and maybe 10 years later there was this silly app on the phone when you could play Magic. I don't know, the Duelists or something. The
Duels of the Planeswalkers?
The one before Arena. There was like a simple app
Duels,
when you could play it against computers, sort of.
Right.
And I downloaded that one, and I subscribed to some kind of mailing list on that one, and because of that I got invited to play the beta on Arena. And then I
Ah,
started beta on Arena, and I just like, my God, I forgot I liked that thing a lot.
right.
And 3 days it took me, and I was on the Pro Release, which I 3-0'd, by the way. So I also learned that I still got it.
Sure. Riding a bicycle. Yes.
It's like riding a bicycle with 5 colors and the mana curve and
It's riding a eight-wheeler or something
yeah.
much more complicated. Yeah.
But yeah.
So you're saying it's very hard for someone to do that, like, or you're saying that it does exist, but people have to kind of like fish for it or something like that.
You have to fish for it. I have my like different lists of streamers that I recommend for different ability, for example, because I know that.
I'm just, yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm just saying that, you know how like if someone has never played limited before, you kind of sit them down and just say, hey, look, here's how it works. Like, you should like. You try to make a 40 card deck, like try to draft like the best card in the pack for the first 5 picks or something. Like, I feel like there just needs to be like a really basic resource like that, because how do people even learn limited? I don't even think you could really learn limited now in the age of Arena. Like, there's no tutorial built into Arena for that, so people are just kind of lost. That's what I'm talking about.
I was invited once by a well-known content creator. I'm not gonna say who he is, but he has a professor's title.
Okay.
To write a script for that kind of thing. And I thought about it for months. It's so hard. It's so hard to make this entry level that is not patronizing, but at the same time, it doesn't go over beginner's head. Defining the sweet spot on that, I just can't do it. I have some content creator that is collaborating with me, I don't know, asking me for advice or something, and they're really nice. Who's trying to do that, but it's just so hard. Because it's about striking this perfect balance. You don't want it, like, because if you make it too specific for someone that never drafted, how are they going to even find it? You need to have some appeal to people who are already invested in limited. So you're already diluting yourself. It's a minefield how to do it neatly. And maybe there's someone that is much more smart than me in that way who can do that, but I absolutely struggle with because I'm thinking about it. I know it's
wouldn't say that.
I just don't know how to do it.
I don't want to come off as like my question is like patronizing, because obviously if something was like easy, someone would have done it, and if someone hasn't done it where I haven't seen them do it, clearly it's more involved in that. Like, I'm not trying to like make my question overly
I didn't find it patronizing
simplistic.
at all. I just think it's just it's way more complex to do it well than because I had that idea and I always was wondering why there's so little of that. But then I tried to think about it, and it's hard. Individually, when I approach it in coaching, it's easy. Because I know the person. I do the interview with that person. I know what are their weaknesses. I look through their replays. I know exactly where they make a mistake, so I can tailor it to them. But to make it generic is very hard, because there will be so many people from so many different backgrounds trying to start limited, and some of them will get offended even if you try to simplify it, because they come from competitive, constructed gameplay and think, we talked about entitlement before, because they come from constructed, they think that they can play limited. It's not true. If you can play limited, then you can probably play constructed. It doesn't work vice versa, for many reasons. And obviously, I don't want to glorify the limited players. It won't work amazingly if you move from limited to constructed, but I think that it's more translatable because you encompass most of the concepts from constructed plus some other that are limited specific, while constructed is more like pattern recognition, planning your first 4 turns, something that in limited is not super important, and positioning yourself against a predictable metagame versus playing against, well, I guess something will happen. Because who knows which of the 287 cards does opponent have in their deck right now. It can be offensive to those players, but at the same time, someone who wants to start playing Magic for some reason by drafting, they might find it completely bewildering, what other people will find completely derogatory towards them. So yeah, it's tough.
Do you think things are perfect as they are? Because we're basically talking about there being by design a higher barrier to entry to limited. Do you think that's something? I mean, we're so close to it, so maybe for us it's acceptable, right? Because we had to earn it. We had to learn all those things. But are there ways to make limited more accessible? Is better accessibility, greater accessibility something that should happen? Does limited need a reinvention? Is it okay the way it is? Well, what do you think about that?
These are, I think, two different questions. I think that it's not okay that limited is treated as this late entry thing. I think it should be the early entry thing, and limited should be the companion format to Commander, really. Because think about it. In paper, in the LGS, when you play limited, you have one copy of everything. You never have a playset out of playing limited, especially on the higher rarity. But one copy of everything, it's good for a particular format that uses only one copy of everything. And that's Commander. So I think that people should try to mix their Commander with limited a bit more. Sometimes you play a game of Commander with your friends. Sometimes you mix 2 pods of Commander and play some limited. I think that would be a good way of spinning this format out. WotC doesn't want to make it into a major competitive format. I don't know why. I guess that Constructed sells more singles.
But this sells a lot of packs, so I don't understand that logic either.
I know that content, in terms of like making coverage, it makes it more complicated. I think that they should never play limited in paper, even on a Pro Tour. They should make the draft pod that is featured. They should make it on Arena, and they should play it out on Arena. They should make them 8 computers. They play around.
Just do digital. Yeah.
And do digital. You can get a better coverage. You can see cards better. You can zoom to them and whatever. Right. That's a must, because it's already confusing when you see the card, the reflection, and you play cards that are not like staples. Constructed, let's be fair. 27 cards and you basically cover the standard. Because what? There's some mice, some removal, there's the cut down, here's the Kaito, blah blah blah, we're done. Some lands, they all look the same, doesn't matter. All Dimir lands look the same. No matter how you show them, you have to guess what they are. But you know that they're Dimir lands because it's sort of like black building on a dark blue background. That's a Dimir land for sure. In limited, there's like some weirdo 2/2 flyer that no one knows because it's not used in Constructed. People don't know. They are not at that level of involvement. If you did the drafts online and you could show the cards nicer and you could show like every person's picks as they go around the circle and what did they not pick, pause it for analysis, I think it would be better for the general coverage. But this is the thing that stops limited in general. It requires a bit deeper knowledge because you need to know all the cards in the set. Otherwise, if you don't know all the cards in the set, you're never going to draft well.
I understand your argument, but I just don't know if that is as relevant anymore, because you and I both know that competitive Magic coverage is de-emphasized now. So my counter argument, or my devil's advocate, I would say, is that Commander doesn't get any coverage, but it's still being pushed as a format. So you could push a format even if it's not watchable. I suppose Commander is very watchable too. It's just all the Commander shows, so maybe I'm contradicting myself, but I feel like how things are with competitive coverage seems to be less of a factor in how pushed something is. So to me, it still feels like fundamentally the barrier to entry of limited being higher is the barrier rather than something else.
I think one thing that it won't happen, but that would push more limited would be to make price structure for drafts on Arena much more flat. Okay. Right now, if you don't get 3 wins, you're basically losing 1,200 gems, which is a lot. If you would make that you can at most lose 500 gems on a draft, people will be much more willing to draft. But financially, it will just not click. Honestly, I think that Arena should be not the thing that makes them money in terms of like selling gems. I think that what they should be making money on Arena is tournaments, like the Opens, like the Win a Box tournament. That makes them a lot of money. And that they should focus on that. And their goal should be that people on Arena should have all the collection done quite easily. They should be able to quite easily get all the cards available for standard, modern, whatever, pioneer. Because in the hope that will drive people to move to paper, because they don't have to spend on Arena, that the Arena doesn't compete with paper, because they play Arena for free, they can get their fix on the weekend to play against
And
real
all the prizes
humans.
are from paper, right? And just
Yeah.
make the digital completely free to participate in.
I mean, maybe not completely free, but make it
different
accessible so
structure.
that you can start Arena right now, and you can spend like $200, and you get your standard decks, and that's
Right.
it. And this is something that people could be spending. And then if they would start playing online, I think that eventually people gravitate towards playing at their local tournament scene, and they will build their deck. And if they don't have to spend on Arena, it will be more likely. And I would use Arena as a gateway drug to the paper game, very much, like Pokemon uses the TV shows as a gateway to the paper card game, rather than using Arena as a parallel universe where people spend their money so they cannot spend the money in real world, which is what happens right now. You either can play in paper or in Arena. You can't do both. People who do both are super engaged players, basically.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to sacrifice the cash cow. I mean, I'm not trying to make this out to be like, capitalism evil. It's just that, Wizards has found their sweet spot when it comes to monetizing off Magic products, digital and physical. And so it's very hard to, there's a certain inertia that's hard to change. And I think as people who live in the real world and are pragmatic, I think we understand that.
Again, I'm not an expert on monetization. I'm, as you realize by my paltry Patreon income. But, so I might be very wrong. And I talked about those things with people who are much better in that. Like I talked with Luis about it. And they say that, it's not going to work because they will want to make as much money from the product as possible. But I still think that there is a fundamental difference between Arena and other online products that, live out of microtransactions, in the way that other products are standalone products. They are the only way of making money. While Arena can be used as bait to get people on paper rather than an end to its own, like a cash cow. You can treat it as a cash cow, you can treat it as bait for paper players. And I think that the better strategy and more longevity you get is for expanding the game in paper, because that's where you want the gathering part of it to be the selling point, and not just be yet another online game that, anyone can make an online game right now. It's cheaper, but it doesn't have this kind of same thing, and the competitive structure is very different. I would probably prefer them to focus on expanding the paper base and using Arena as a bait for that. But what do I know? I'm not a marketing specialist. I just don't have the trust if Wizards are either.
Yes. I mean, I guess if we want to be a little more on the optimistic but still pragmatic side, it seems like limited. Would you say limited is still? It's still really good as a format, right? Like there's still you still seem excited by, right? I mean, people have been saying we've been in the golden age for the last 5 or so years. Like it seems like they're really doing well designing things for limited. Whether or not people want to play it is another question. But for those who have devoted themselves or dedicated themselves or choose to play, like it's fun, right?
Well, you listen to Mark Rosewater, and he says that how long you play Magic is the predictor of how much you like limited. The longer you play, the more you like limited. This is the format that naturally older players tend to gravitate to, because they understand the fundamentals of the game better. It comes more naturally to them. And this is something that is going to be hard to break, because as we talked earlier in our pre-show talk, it's hard to change human nature, and human demographics are as they are. So I think that limited is never going to become the main way of how the game is being played. I think it should be more popular. I think it's beneficial for players to learn the game better, to play draft, and especially draft, and understand a bit more about it. And I think it's in a healthy place. There is a lot of you sit down and you can play a draft any moment of your life. I could just quit this call right now, and in 3 minutes I'll be drafting if I wanted to. which is something,
That's part of being
when,
in the golden age is accessibility. Yes.
when I was a kid, I had one draft a month, maybe. We were like sneaking into there was this KFC in Warsaw that had the second floor, and they didn't have security camera on the second floor. So we usually set ourselves up, played some drafts. We smuggled some beers in our backpacks, and we were sitting there drinking beer in the Burger King, having some burgers. Oh, no, it was KFC, I think. I think it's.
Wait, did you say underage drinking as well? Okay, that makes it more fun.
I mean, it's Poland. I mean, I think we were all 17, which is sort of like not underage. But yeah. It worked just fine for us until they figured it out and kicked us out. Until we found out that one of the guys that was playing with us, one of his uncles was some kind of a top manager in the chain. I don't remember. I think it was KFC at that stage. And we were allowed back in. And they never could kick us out ever again because of nepotism, which was great. So yeah, there was no LGS, like good LGS in Warsaw at that time. So we were really struggling as a player group right then because a couple of them closed, a couple of them were too small to host drafts. So we had to do guerrilla Magic the Gathering on the second floor of a KFC. Yeah.
That was how you got started with the Gathering, was just playing. So was draft one of your first Magic experiences then, or
no? I started playing. It was so random. I mean, some people get introduced to Magic by other people. I was never introduced to Magic by anyone. I didn't know anyone who played Magic. I was absolutely outside of it.
So that implies you found it on your own.
Yeah, I literally was. I was in the bilingual school, so it was like Polish and German, and we were sent to the student exchange in Germany. I think in like 97 maybe. It was, I think, Weatherlight. That was the set at that time. And I was in some shop, and it had this pack of 5th edition, the starter pack, with the basic lands and everything. And I looked at it, and I don't know how, but I knew that this is for me. And I just bought it. And I started playing. I have no idea what I'm doing with it. I just bought it. I knew it's mine. I played cards all my life. I played bridge. I played other variants of the normal French cards. Since I was a kid, I was always focused on playing cards. My family was pretty big into cards, and generally shuffling was a way of life in our family. And games were always there, present. But this one, and I was into fantasy literature, and these are the cards that literally have fantasy dragons on them. And they look complex, and they look interesting. So I just bought it, and I never looked back. I played with my friend from high school, but I think that he gave up after a month or so. But then I made a very genius strategical move. I asked my parents to ask my brother not to play the game, because I want to have something for myself, and whatever I do, he always tries to copy me, so can he please stop playing the cards? And of course, if you want to motivate my brother to do something, this was the best way. So
tell him not to do something.
Instantly started playing, and then I had someone to play with, and we played like all the time. I mean, I still have marks on my hands from shuffling, because I got like calluses from shuffling from... Yeah, and then I was like super invested. But I found Magic on my own without any help, and I just knew that it's for me somehow. And it turns out, for good or for bad, it was.
That's incredible. Yeah, 90s Magic was the best. Yeah, that's when I started too. Not Magic, but I do remember also like just collecting other CCGs that are now dead. Asking my mom to take me to the shop.
Like X-Files, Lord of the Rings, card game, that kind of stuff.
Lord of the Rings was one of my favorites. I didn't even have anyone to play with. I just bought the cards.
I still don't know the rules.
I just love the way the cards look. I still remember they have like the Unlimited Edition had the blue borders, and they had like the black borders, and I even bought, like back then they had those players guides. I even bought those, but I had no one to play with. I mean, it was just like, there's no online anything, so it's just like you have to go to the LGS, and I just went to the LGS to buy cards, and that was it. So yeah, good times.
Yeah, no, I have a couple of games that I just bought because I like the franchise, like the X-Files and the Lord of the Rings was definitely one of those. And Magic,
I also had the X-Files CCG. Yeah, I was also a huge X-Files nerd, so I definitely bought a lot of those cards. Yeah,
I mean, we are the same generation roughly.
Yes, we are the same generation, just in different parts of the world, but definitely you know, as you know, probably from listening to the podcast, like I live in the 90s, like, you know, basically my Spotify playlist is still all like 90s music. So it's just like I still live there.
So
Yeah.
you're into the modern music.
I'm into modern music. Yeah, I have in the back I have like I think that's the Smashing Pumpkins vinyl,
Oh
like
God.
Melancholy and Infinite Sadness. My favorite album is from 1995, so
my wife's favorite band, Smashing Pumpkins. I was never that much into Billy Corgan. I just like found him annoying, and that's why I never
it's the
listened
voice.
to them.
It's very much an acquired taste. Yeah.
Yeah, I was more the Nirvana person. But I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna yuck someone's yum. I listen now. I listen to Smashing Pumpkins with much more of a nostalgia because the nostalgia killed the dislike, I think, and I think the music defends itself in a way. I think it's
Yeah.
I was not driven by rational thought when I didn't like them in the 90s.
And I feel like for me that also extends to magic. I feel like I've sort of leaned into my old man yelling at clouds role of like, oh, you know, I was there in the 90s when, you know, we bought, you know, Duelist magazine and, you know, we did those Mark Rosewater puzzles at the last page and, you know, we had the sideboard to like read about tournaments instead of actually using the internet. Like we had all that stuff. We had price guides.
I was one of the early adopters of Dojo.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very
seminal.
early on the Dojo. I did read the sideboard. I mean, it's so funny that, you know, I vividly remember when I was a kid and I was reading about the Pro Tour and there was a picture of the winner, Kyle Rose. And now, I mean, I know Ham TV because I always raid him when I finish my seminars. He always streaming at the same time. So I always rate Ham, and I know him, and he knows me, and it's so weird that this is the guy I read about in this newspaper 20-something years ago as he was winning the Pro Tour.
Yes, that's honestly one of the pleasures I think we have as being part of in the Magic community is just there are people that are still going at it, right? And it's fun. So just to kind of close it out, I mean, Sierkovitz, I probably don't need to, but I would like to ask you to plug your content. Where can people find you and your work so that you can get more patrons, hopefully?
I'm on this thing called internet. I use it a lot.
It wasn't around in the 90s. It was barely, but I think it's out in full force now from what I heard.
It was, but it made a weird noise when you started it.
Yes. There's a little dialing, yes.
The dial-up sound is something that I think should be obligatory installed to any modem. When it starts, it should make that noise so that I know when it's finally working. I think that the easiest way of finding me is my podcast, Magic Numbers. It's both on YouTube because it's a data-driven podcast, so I have a lot of graphs, so I always release them in the video form as well. Apart from that, I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky. I tried to post on both, but I think I'm going to slowly phase out of Twitter. It's just, you know, I have 7,000 followers. It's tough to lose that. It's hard
equity. To let go. Yeah.
But as the Blue Sky community is growing, I'm going to be more and more in there. But there I am also as Sierkovitz, which hopefully will be somewhere spelled out in the title of this podcast if you don't know how to write it. It's not a real word, so however you pronounce it is correct. But the spelling is only in one way, so unfortunately you have to spell me right. But I think if you write Sierkovitz Data, you will find me in one way or another. If you want to chat with me a bit closer, I have a Discord that you can find in the descriptions of my YouTube stuff. So if you want to go there and you can share your draft logs and talk about that kind of stuff, that's what we're doing in my Discord, basically. So, that's my plug.
Well, Sierkovitz, it's been nice having you on the cast. Thank you so much for coming by and just chatting.
No worries, my pleasure. Best $500 I ever spent.
All right, see you next time.
See you next time.